The boss who fired me for dating his assistant, and paid dearly for it. Fresh out of college, I landed what seemed like a straightforward job at an office supply company. What started as a summer position quietly stretched into something longer and more complicated. The company specialized in outfitting corporate clients moving into new buildings. They'd send in the full crew: interior designers, electricians, IT specialists, even landscapers. My role was coordinating the IT side of things for major accounts. For specialized work, clients were billed at $600 an hour for my time. The number floored me at first, but on a multi-million-dollar build-out, it was a drop in the bucket. The top executive had a personal assistant, sharp, warm, and genuinely fun to be around. She and I started spending time together, grabbing lunch when we could. The problem was that our boss clearly had his own interest in her, and he didn't appreciate the competition. She often made polite excuses to slip away from his lunches and meet up with me instead. Meanwhile, the sales department had come to me with a real headache: a vendor database that wasn't compatible with their internal system. I looked it over and estimated a few days of actual work. But knowing my schedule, I told them to expect delivery in a few weeks. I'd squeeze it in between other assignments. Then came the weekend that changed everything. Some friends of hers were throwing a party 10 hours away. She invited me along. We both requested Monday and Tuesday off so we'd have time to make the drive back after the festivities wrapped up Sunday evening. She got approved. I got denied, with no real explanation offered. I suspected the big boss was behind it. And honestly, she mattered more to me than the job did. So we went. On Monday, my manager called. He told me he'd originally signed off on my time off, but the top executive had overridden him and was now demanding I be fired if I didn't return immediately. That wasn't physically possible. We were hours away. I told him I'd be in Wednesday. Wednesday morning, I showed up and found my desk already cleared out. I was terminated on the spot. My direct manager was visibly embarrassed and apologized. Most of my colleagues quietly made clear they thought the whole thing was unfair. I loaded my things into my company car and drove straight to an attorney. He laid it out plainly. First, I was still technically employed until I received written notice of termination, which I hadn't. Second, the way they'd handled my dismissal violated several labor statutes. He sent the company a letter informing them of his intent to sue. The timing couldn't have been worse for them. The company was in the middle of an acquisition and had zero appetite for a lawsuit. A senior executive and a corporate attorney flew in from headquarters to deal with the mess. They were furious, not at me, but at the local boss for his reckless, law-breaking decision. We settled for $50,000. After the papers were signed, the top executive made a point of telling me he never wanted to see my face again and never wanted me working on anything connected to him. Fine by me. Or so I thought. The sales department manager found out I'd been let go and called me, genuinely upset. He asked if there was any way I could still finish the database project. They had major orders on hold waiting for it. I told him I'd love to help. But the big boss had specifically forbidden me from doing any work for the company. So unless I received written authorization, in writing, from the big boss himself, retracted, and with a formal consulting agreement, my hands were tied. I heard it took a tense, heated meeting between the sales manager and the executive to make it happen. But 2 days later, the email arrived. I invoiced them 40 hours to complete the tools, and another 40 hours for the full database conversion, all at my standard rate of $600 an hour. That's $48,000 on top of the $50,000 settlement. Nearly $100,000 in total, because one man let his ego drive a business decision. After the acquisition closed, the company restructured. The big boss was laid off. There's a lesson buried in there somewhere. When you mistreat the person who's solving your most expensive problems, don't be surprised when solving those problems gets very expensive. ## story 2. They bullied me out of a job. Then I made sure it cost them. Landing a paid position as a veterinary assistant at an animal shelter felt like the culmination of years of hard work. I'd spent a long stretch volunteering and interning, much of it unpaid or barely above minimum wage, at an exotic animal rehabilitation center and a wildlife sanctuary. The animals in those places needed daily medical attention, and I learned to provide it. When the shelter job finally came through, I thought I'd arrived. Week 1 went beautifully. My manager, I'll call her A-hole, trained me directly and made a point of saying she was impressed by how naturally I handled the animals. Other staff said the same. I felt like I belonged. Then week 2 arrived. and the dynamic shifted. A-hole handed my training off to 2 licensed vet techs. I'll call them BTCH and Idiot. Both were well into their 40s, which made what followed all the more disappointing. BTCH ignored me for most of our shifts together, parked in front of her computer, leaving me to work independently. Any question I asked was met with a theatrical eye roll and a dismissive ask the veterinarian. Idiot's approach was the opposite, relentless micromanagement. She hovered over my shoulder while I drew vaccines and ran blood tests, visibly frustrated even when she had nothing to correct. By week 3, the atmosphere had curdled entirely. The staff went quiet when I walked past. I was pulled away from my clinical work to fold towels and mop floors. Then the open mockery started. I'm autistic and have anxiety, and I pick at my nails, a nervous habit that sometimes draws a little blood. I'd been quietly wearing bandages. BTCH made sure to stage a comment, loud enough for me to hear, pointing out my nails and turning it into a hygiene joke for the amusement of her little audience. They mocked the way I walk. They made a snide remark about a digestive probiotic drink I'd brought. Every day for nearly a week, I held back tears while doing grunt work, treated like I was on display for their entertainment. It was humiliating and deliberate. In week 4, the clinic director, I'll call him Dummus, called me into his office during a staff meeting. He left the door wide open and told me, in front of everyone, that he wanted to discuss my performance. He said I had the right attitude, but I just wasn't quite catching on. I pushed back. I listed everything I'd been doing, drawing and administering vaccines, running blood tests, filling prescriptions, entering patient data, handling check-in and check-out, restraining animals. I asked him specifically what I wasn't catching on to. He stuttered, then said I was asking too many questions, leaving without informing anyone, and being too fidgety around the animals. I asked him to close the door. When he did, I told him I was autistic, had bipolar disorder, and lived with severe anxiety. He went quiet. Then his entire posture changed. He said this changed things. He asked how they could accommodate me. I explained that the bandage breaks were 30 seconds long. I was changing a bandage, not disappearing, and that all I needed was genuine hands-on training. He ended the conversation by assuring me that only HR and the other manager would know about my disclosures, and that my information would be treated with respect. I walked out crying. BTCH was waiting just outside the office door. She laughed. The rest of that shift was 4 hours of standing in the clinic with nothing to do and nowhere to go, slipping in and out of the restroom to manage panic attacks every 10 to 15 minutes. That evening, I looked up reviews of the shelter. Nearly half of them described the exact same experience: bullied by the vet techs, reprimanded for trivial reasons, let go for having the wrong social standing. Skill had nothing to do with it. Being like did. I knew I needed to start building a paper trail. They helped me start it. One of the managers sent me a text after 11 p.m. with a new schedule, 6 consecutive workdays. During my interview, we had specifically agreed to a maximum of 4 days a week. I had school, and I couldn't afford additional transportation costs. I emailed Dummus that night explaining I was too distressed from our recent conversation to come in. He replied quickly, wishing me well and telling me to return when I was ready. His tone made clear he understood exactly where things stood. After a second email, he again said I could take as much time as I needed. Then HR called. I scheduled the call for 4:30 the following afternoon, enough time for him to sit with his anxiety about it all day. When we spoke, he referenced red flags from my performance. I asked him to be specific. He fumbled. I told him our most recent conversation wasn't about my performance at all. It was about my disabilities. He went silent. Then he just kept repeating, "Your termination is effective immediately." I kept asking him to name one thing I'd done wrong. He hung up. I fell into a serious depression after that. I won't minimize it. This job had represented years of effort, and losing it that way, along with the mockery, the isolation, the humiliation, knocked me down hard. I have a history of severe mental health crises, and this brought me close to that edge again. But I had 180 days to file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Around day 150, I found an attorney willing to take the case on contingency. We filed just before day 165. They offered to mediate. I agreed. HR showed up late. The offer was $700. I declined. The EEOC process continued for over a year. In early June, I was finally able to issue a notice of right to sue. By the end of that month, we settled for a 5-figure amount, roughly 35 times what they'd offered at mediation. After taxes and contingency fees, it wasn't a windfall. But that was never the point. A few nights ago, I checked the clinic's website on a whim. Dumbass was gone. I looked at his LinkedIn. His employment there ended the same month I issued the right to sue notice. He's now listed as self-employed at some consulting firm. No farewell post. No grateful for the journey announcement. Just a quiet disappearance. People who leave on good terms usually say something. He didn't. That was more satisfying than the check. Story 3. I moved to a Caribbean island. A corrupt official tried to make my life hell. She didn't win. I spent the first 24 years of my life in New York City, and by the end of it, I was done. Not defeated. I'd built a good career and a decent salary. But the noise, the relentlessness, the feeling of being one anonymous face in 10 million had quietly worn me out. I needed something different. My parents had emigrated from the Caribbean before I was born, leaving behind a life and a community they still spoke about with warmth. They'd continued to visit over the years, but I had never really considered going myself. Until now. After weeks of researching properties in the northeastern United States and finding nothing that felt right, or nothing affordable that did, I started looking further afield. I found myself drawn to the Dominican Republic, specifically one of the smaller surrounding islands. And there, in a remote listing I had to double-check 3 times to believe, was a 2-story house surrounded by trees on a nearly isolated lot. It was in good condition. It was abandoned. And it was priced so far below anything I'd seen that I moved quickly. I completed all the paperwork, paid all the required fees upfront, confirmed my company would allow me to work remotely from abroad, which I understood to be genuinely unusual, and within weeks, I was home. The first several days were exactly what I'd hoped for. Quiet. Space. Time to breathe before setting up my remote office. About a week in, there was a knock at the door. A middle-aged local woman introduced herself as an official in the island's local government, which, she was quick to clarify, she essentially ran. She then informed me I owed a processing fee. I'd paid every fee on record before I ever arrived. I told her so, and asked her to clarify what she meant. She just looked at me and said I knew what she was asking for. It took a moment to register. She was asking for a bribe. I told her the house was paid in full, she had no legal standing to demand additional money, and if she needed documentation, I'd provide it. I was not paying. She handed me her card without a word and left. Her eyes said plenty. I did my research. She hadn't lied about her position. She wielded real authority on that island. By reputation, she was known for squeezing residents, fabricating pretexts, and not backing down. Courts included. The next morning, I had no water. Not a trickle. I checked for leaks, checked local news, nothing. I called her. She told me I had an unpaid water fee and that she had cut off my access to the island's shared water supply. Her tone was breezy. Pay the fee, she said, and it would be restored. I told her what she was doing was illegal, that I recognized it for exactly what it was, and that if she wanted a bribe, she should try someone else. She told me, flatly, that I didn't understand how things work there, that she considered me a risk to the community, and that she'd make sure she got what she wanted before I did. Then she hung up. I couldn't drink. I couldn't shower. I couldn't wash my face. I documented everything, the call, the water shutoff, her card, every piece of correspondence, and took all of it to the mainland. I filed a formal complaint with the regional government office that held authority over her position. The process was surprisingly straightforward. Maybe too straightforward, because the next morning I found a notice taped to my front door. It stated that due to the property's prior abandoned status, the house had been deemed uninhabitable and was being filed for demolition. I had 30 days to vacate. It was signed by her. She was threatening to have my home torn down because I'd reported her. I went back to the mainland, checked into a hotel, finally got myself cleaned up, and hired an attorney who specialized in corruption cases. When we met, he thanked me for arriving with as much documentation as I had. She had, apparently, made no effort to be subtle. We spent several days compiling everything, my paperwork proving legal ownership and complete payment of all fees, records of the phone calls, photographs of the water shutoff, the demolition notice, which, upon closer examination, looked legally dubious even to a layperson, and statements from several of my neighbours, some of whom had quietly been paying her for years without knowing they had any recourse. We presented the full case to the regional government. The attorney walked them through the applicable statutes. Bribery and abuse of authority are criminal offences under the law. We had video, photographs, and documents. The officials in that room looked mortified. She was suspended pending a full investigation. Within a short time, she was removed from her position entirely. I received a formal letter from one of the officers on the case, apologising for the experience and assuring me I remained welcome. The warder came back on. A few months have passed since then. I've made friends across the island. This place is home now, genuinely. The quiet she tried to poison turned out to be worth fighting for. ## story 4. They wouldn't pay my rate. So I made sure they did. Back when I was putting myself through university, I worked 2 jobs simultaneously. One at a video rental store, think Blockbuster, and one at a local IT company doing business service calls and troubleshooting. The video store got new owners. Not long after they took over, the cash register's connection to the point-of-sale computer started acting up. I offered to take a look at it. I knew the system, I was already there, and I quoted them my standard store rate, around $15 an hour at the time. They declined. They wanted a professional. Fair enough. No offense taken. They called the local computer repair shop and were told someone would be there shortly. A few minutes later, my cell phone rang. It was the computer shop. They needed a tech for a job, the video store job, as it turned out. I was the closest available person with the right skills. I answered the call in front of the new owners. I confirmed I'd take the job. Then I turned to them and said, simply, that I'd be happy to handle it, but since I was now coming through the computer shop, the billing rate was $70 an hour. There was a pause. They accepted. I fixed the problem. And going forward, we worked out a direct arrangement. They paid me more than the original $15, but less than the $70 an hour pass-through rate they'd just experienced. Sometimes the most elegant lesson is the one people teach themselves.